Well, hello, good evening. Welcome to Grieving Together support during the holidays. Let me just check. Can you hear me? Am I coming in loud and clear? Let's start with that. Thank you, thank you, thank you. Oh my gosh, I just had to collect myself a little bit. Oh, seeing so many friends, so many familiar names. Thank you for all of you for joining me. And I just want to pay my respects to you, my honor to you for showing up for a session about grief, a place for you to not only think about how grief is affecting your life, to take stock in how you can support yourself, especially during the holidays. And, I brought my sequins out tonight and some red lipstick because I said, if we are going to be paying our respects to those, our beloveds, then we should at least wear some sparkle, maybe some glitter, maybe some red lipstick, because that's why we're all here. So, um, I want to again really welcome you to this. I know there's a lot of things happening this time of year, and it's not easy to show up to a session about grief. And here you are. So, thank you for that. Um, I guess first I want to just start with where are you coming into this webinar for in the world? Like, let's just get a feeling. Let me know in the chat, where are you in the world? Um, One of the things that I know is that grief, grief is indescript of whether or not we are rich, we are poor, we are black, we are white, we are working, we are not working, we are gendered, we are non-gendered. It has no depiction on demographics. It doesn't care about our past tragedies or traumas. Grief ultimately is universal. And I come to this world of grief really through a bunch of different lenses. Let me just take a look where everybody's coming in from. Oh, all over that place. I love it. Good. And I want to just give you an idea of, for those of you that don't know me, I see a lot of familiar names in the chat, and it warms my heart really to see so many of you that, first of all, are maybe coming through this work through the lens of your work with animals. Maybe you're coming to this tonight through the lens of your grief as it relates to humans. We're going to talk about all of it. And to some degree, I don't think it matters. Grief is grief. We're going to talk about that. But for those of you that might be new to me, I'm Julie Squires. I have spent a lot of my life working in veterinary medicine. And that was my first, probably, well, not my first exposure to grief. I'll talk with you about that here in a second. But certainly a big portion of my understanding about death and about grief came through the lens of veterinary medicine. But I now work as a compassion fatigue specialist. I'm a life coach. I'm a grief educator. I work predominantly with people who work with animals, mostly in veterinary medicine, in how to really navigate through those waters that do include grief. And it's something we don't talk about very much. I'm a dog mom. My dogs are in the back, so far behaving, but we don't really know. And I am ukulele curious and learning. Was just playing my ukulele before I hit go on the webinar tonight. So my history with grief probably first started when I was 18 years old and I lost a very dear friend to suicide. I had just, returned back to college, and it was in December, and received a phone call that my very good friend had died by suicide. And there was nothing that had prepared me for that. And it was my first real exposure to a deep, deep, painful loss. Since then, I have lost many beloved pets. I know I'm not the only one. And then almost 2.5 years ago, I lost my mom suddenly to a massive heart attack. And it was my mom's death that really spurred me into this work. I didn't know what to do. I had many tools. I have tools as a life coach. I know how to work with cognition and change my thinking. And I did not know how to navigate grief. I often say that my mom taught me everything except how to live without her. And that is the honest to God's truth. My mom was my best friend. She was my rock. She was the thread through my life that created a stability and so much so that I didn't even realize. I will be honest. I'm a fairly independent person. And my mom, I did not realize just her constant presence in my life, what a grounding force that was. I didn't realize it until it was gone. And you may have experienced that to some degree too, of sometimes not even realizing, especially when we're, on our own and we're adults and stuff like that. But we don't realize sometimes especially when it comes to parents, the part that they've played in our life. So, my work with animals, as I described earlier, really taught me a lot about death. And I am so grateful for my experience and constant exposure to euthanasia because that also taught me how to discontinue life support for my dear, sweet mom. And animals, to some degree, have taught me how to grieve. And I'm very, very, very grateful for my pets. But again, when my mom passed, I found myself lost. Some moments I still find myself lost. And you know what? That's part of grief is we navigate through being lost, and then we think we've got it figured out, and then we feel lost again. And we're going to talk about some of those things. So love is love and loss is loss. And guess what? Whether your loss tonight that you're here, I want to know about who you are here grieving, and who you are experiencing loss of. Human or animal, grief is universal. And no, humans aren't the only species that grieve. We have lots of evidence of other species of animals that grieve. We know that. But tonight we're here to talk about the human experience of grief. So let me know in the chat, who are you grieving? And I want to know who and how long ago did the person pass? And some of you may be here for anticipatory grief. If that's the case, you might just put in who the person is that is maybe on your mind tonight or on your heart tonight. Just want to get a sense of, where people are at. Yeah, my mom, 2023, my dad 18 years ago, my husband, loss of relationship 6 months ago, anticipatory grief. My husband passed 20 months ago. Oh, my mom with dementia, lost my dear dog in October and beautiful mom in October. Oh, so many losses. My soul cat. I'm seeing them. They're coming in fast. My marriage, the life I had planned. Yes. Euthanized my dog last week. Oh, parents and pets. Yeah. My mom, she has dementia. Yeah. 3 brothers, parents, brother, dad, mom. Oh, I'm here for all of it. I'm here for all of it. And I know that you're here for all of it. And just notice what happens all of a sudden when we start talking about how long has it been, right? Some of you, here's 37 years, 20 years, 6 months ago, last week. Whether or not we're in the early stages of grief, which is typically about the first 2 years, or we're in the later stages of grief, our grief doesn't really change. And we're going to talk about that. So let's get something really clear. And that is that grief ultimately is love. So I want to ask you right now to take a moment and recognize the love that you have for the people or animals that you put in the chat. Recognize the love that brings you here tonight. Just take a moment, right? We wouldn't be grieving if we weren't loving. And sometimes that is unrequited love. Sometimes we grieve for a relationship that wasn't what we wanted it to be. Maybe it was an estranged relationship and the love wasn't reciprocated. But there's still grief there because there's loss. Grief ultimately is our reaction to loss, any type of loss. We are talking a lot about death tonight, but also I saw come through the chat about relationships ending, right? Things that we thought were going to be, what we thought our future was going to be. Yeah. My dad passed away when I was a teenager. I never processed it. And, that brings up an extremely good point. We live in a grief illiterate world, even today. So, so many of you are talking about grief from many years ago. And if we live in a grief illiterate world today in 2023, also think about the world in which you were living in when your loved one passed 20 years ago, 37 years ago, whenever it was. Now, here's what I know about grief. What I know about grief is your grief is unique. Grief is as unique as a snowflake. I know many of you have seen those beautiful images of snowflakes, right? Every single one is different. This blows my mind. Nobody knows your grief. Your siblings, so those of you that have lost parents, your siblings, your brothers and sisters don't know your grief. Those of you that are pet parents that have lost pets, your significant other or the rest of your family does not know your grief. If you are parents and you have lost a child, your significant other does not know your grief. Why is that? Nobody knows your grief because your relationship with those that have passed was unique to you. Even again, my brother and I, right? We both lost our mom. We both had a different relationship with our mom. Our grief is different. And this grief illiterate world that we live in, we don't even know what to say to each other. And so many of you are in the animal world here. And, I just call it like it is sometimes. Those of you that work as animal workers, right? In a helping profession such as veterinary medicine, you are hardwired to help. You are hardwired to want to make it better. And grief is one of those things we don't get to make better. What happens is we don't know how to sit with each other and not try to make it better, which is really frustrating, right? And hey, I have a feeling many of you have been on the receiving end of people trying to say things to you to try to make it better. Well, Julie, your mom lived a long life. That doesn't make me feel any better. She was 76. I wanted her to be 96. I wanted her to have 20 more years, right? When our pets die, it's like, well, you know, at least you were able to offer euthanasia. Yeah, that is wonderful, but that also doesn't make me feel better because I didn't want my dog to have cancer. So we also have to recognize that because we live in this grief illiterate world, many of the people around us, they try to say things. It's all well intended. They try to make it better for us. And so many people say the wrong things. They don't mean to. And I'm sure we could have a whole session about all the outrageous things people have said to us. But the truth is about grief is it is so dang isolating. And your friends, your family, your coworkers, society may not get your pain. They may disappoint you in how they show up for you. I remember very early, like when my mom passed, I just went nuts, like looking for support, like on the internet, right? Like, geez, how grateful am I that I have something like the internet? Those of you that had losses 37 years ago, I mean, geez, you didn't have many places to turn. You probably had to go to Walden Books and look for books on grief, which there weren't probably many other than Elizabeth Kubler-Ross's book, Death and Dying. But I remember going on the internet and I found this creative writing group about grief. And the first question, we were given prompts every day. And the first prompt that we were offered was a prompt, something to the effect of, who is someone who hasn't shown up for you like you wished during your grief? And I was like taken aback by that because I didn't want to at all look around in my life and think that anyone didn't show up for me the way that they wanted to or the way that I wanted them to. But the truth is that there were people in my life that let me down, right? And I'm okay with that. I understand that people don't know what to do or say. And sometimes it's the people that we're closest to that become the most distant and silent. And I want to suggest for your consideration that that's their uncomfortability with grief. Now, we also live in this world where people want us to get through it quickly. Geez, Julie, are you done grieving yet? It's been 2.5 years. Come on, let's go. And, for anyone that wants to ask the question of how long will you grieve, my grief teacher, David Kessler, has the most beautiful answer for that. He says, for as long as I'm going to love that person, right? That's how long I'm going to grieve them, which is infinity. We're always going to grieve them. And the thing that's so isolating sometimes about grief is that the world keeps going. And here we are brokenhearted. Yeah, I'm not talking about it doesn't help any of us. That is so true. That is so true. And yet, part of the reason why I decided to do this was because we don't get an opportunity to talk about it. We don't get an opportunity to be amongst other grievers, to be like, oh, you too? Wow, it feels nice to be amongst others that are, again, our grief is all different, but there are some commonalities. And one commonality is just this sense of, wow, like I'm feeling lost, or I don't know what to do with these emotions, or people don't understand me, or I'm afraid of how I'm going to show up for the holidays because a lot of the things I want to make some choices that may not be all that popular with my family and friends, et cetera, et cetera. So yeah, I remember how infuriating it was that the world just kept going on while my mom died. I was like, how can people be pumping gas? Don't they know my mother just died? Shouldn't the whole world come to a complete stop? I can't be the only one who thought that or thinks that. But one of the things that, yeah, I see some hands raised. Yeah. But I want to give you permission to feel your feelings, because this is part of the problem, is that we often don't feel as though we have permission to feel our feelings. We don't live in a world which is very conducive to emotions. And again, I'm speaking to a lot of my animal folks here. You experience emotion all day long and have to very quickly move on to the next thing. You never get a chance to actually sit with some of the grief, the sadness, the sorrow that you feel just at work, let alone talking about your personal life. So all feelings are welcome. Can you give yourself permission that all feelings are welcome? Can you allow yourself to feel all the feels? So I wanted to read to you this beautiful poem. Some of you may know The Guest House by Rumi, because I think it just um, really, really sums this up pretty well. This being human is a guest house. Every morning, a new arrival. A joy, a depression, a meanness, some momentary awareness comes as an unexpected visitor. Welcome and entertain them all, even if they're a crowd of sorrows who violently sweep your house empty of its furniture. Still treat each guest honorably. He may be clearing you out for some new delight. The dark thought, the shame, the malice, meet them at the door laughing and invite them in. Be grateful for whoever comes, because each has been sent as a guide from beyond. I love a lot of Rumi's poems, but I especially love that one. So, yeah, give yourself permission. I don't care if it's been 37 years or 37 minutes. Give yourself permission. You have the right to feel what you feel. And just because other people may be uncomfortable with your grief is not a reason for you to not give yourself permission to feel. I want to just kind of quickly go over the different kinds of grief. And this isn't an exhaustive list, but I know many of you are experiencing different kinds of grief. And I just wanted to kind of go through them kind of quickly for you. So there's something called delayed grief. That is grief that we don't feel in the moment because we can't. Maybe it's not safe to feel it, or maybe we're in survival mode, so we can't feel it at the time. Again, figure out, you'll see places, things will resonate with you, right? For those of you that work in helping professions, this may be about work, or there may have been other situations in your life where you had delayed grief, where you couldn't feel it in the moment because it wasn't safe. Disenfranchised grief. This is any grief that we judge or minimize, or that we feel like we're not allowed to have, or we feel like isn't publicly recognized. Loving animals and grieving animals often fits into this disenfranchised grief, right? Because many people are like, well, it was just your dog. It wasn't like it was a child or anything, right? We've all heard those comments, right? And of course, they're all wrong. Our pets can absolutely be like our children. But disenfranchised grief, any grief, again, that we judge or minimize. Ambiguous grief, that is grief that's hard to see. So I saw many of you talking about Alzheimer's or cognitive decline. That's definitely part of ambiguous grief. So can be relationship breakups, grief about even just changes in your job, in your work environment can also fall into ambiguous grief. Inconclusive grief. This is often around when there's not a body to grieve. And again, whether those are circumstances surrounding a body and or there is no body that can be found and people don't have that sense of closure. That's what inconclusive grief is. Complicated grief. This is, well, primarily when we have so much painful emotions that are so severe that we have trouble resuming and or creating our life. And this can be grief when you didn't have a good relationship with the deceased. This can also be grief of a relationship that you wished you had. All kind of falls in here to complicated grief. Collective grief. This is when we grieve as a group, when we grieve an event, when we grieve publicly or a public figure. Or I even take Matthew Perry for an example, right? Many of us feel collective grief about that. Or maybe a particular animal at work. There's collective grief amongst all of you. Maybe there's a coworker that died that we feel collective grief about. Or my sweet beloved Esther the Wonder Pig. I did some grief session about her. Again, huge. She has a huge audience. Again, collective grief. Next, we have traumatic grief. Traumatic grief is whenever there's trauma combined with our own grief response, which again can happen for lots of different reasons. Anticipatory grief. Yes, anticipatory grief is real. This is the grief that comes before death. And that could be due to illness, chronic illness, Alzheimer's, stage 4 cancer diagnosis, declining PETS condition. And we also have some anticipatory grief around the holidays when we think that it's going to be too hard. Like in advance, we can anticipate, right, how difficult the holidays can be, and there are grief around the holidays. So we can kind of create that a little bit for ourselves too. Next up is cumulative grief. Cumulative grief is when we experience multiple losses back to back to back. I saw so many of you that had so many losses that were in such proximity to each other. And, a lot of you were mentioning death there, but you could have death and then lose your job, right? A week later, like that could be also cumulative grief. And then lastly would be what we call secondary losses. So these are losses that accompany grief. So these are things that are in addition to our primary emotional response to losing a loved one. So this might be, we also lose a relationship with a client, let's say if their pet dies, or because our significant other died, holiday gatherings now are different, or maybe because my mom died, our holidays are different. There's secondary loss there. So people who lose pets, their secondary losses sometimes can be their social outlet because that dog used to be the thing that got them out of the house and they would, again, socialize with the neighbors. So again, that could be a secondary loss of losing that social aspect of how I used to get out of my house. Or maybe I saw some of you lost a parent at a young age, and maybe you had to take on responsibilities as a kid that typically weren't for kids to take on. You may have secondary losses of losing a bit of your childhood. So I have a feeling probably a lot of those things resonated with a lot of you. You probably saw a bit of your grief in one of these and were able to identify, ooh, yeah, that's a little bit of what I've experienced. So let me know in the chat here, what makes grief around the holidays so hard? I have some ideas, but I'd be curious to know what you think. What makes grief around the holidays so hard? Because I don't know if all of you would have shown up if I did this, in June, let's say. Like, would so many of you shown up for that? Let's see, pressure on myself to be happy. Oh, yes. Vivid memories, lost traditions. Yeah, nostalgia. You're still expected to do everything. Right on. Everyone else seems to be having so much fun. Knowing that no new memories will be made, it hurts too much to feel happiness without them. Empty space. Yeah. watching other people struggle with the holidays, a lot of public appearances with underlying expectations. Yeah, for sure. It's marking the moments, the memories. Yeah. And so much of what you're all saying here, right? It's like the holidays sort of like make an imprint on us because they're specific days of the year that we have traditions and rituals around where we don't have those on, February 3rd or August 12th, unless it's your birthday. Pressure from others to participate, longing for what we had together. Yes. Yeah. Right. And sometimes, yeah, there we go. Some of you had losses right around the holidays. Yes. Being a third wheel at friends, families, events. Yeah. So let me see if I have anything to add to that. We have so many memories around these particular days, who we were with, what we did. And most of us, again, don't feel that way about other days of the year, but we do around the holidays because those are, again, specific moments in time which get imprinted in our brain. They have significance these days. We have expectations to have the perfect holiday, to have the Instagram holiday, to have the Hallmark movie holiday. We may have spent the day with this loved one. Yeah, for sure. The music, the movies, the TV shows, the decorations are everywhere, and they're often about togetherness, family time, etc. These are people that may have held the traditions and now they're gone. And now we feel a little bit lost, like who's going to do those things? Nobody picks up that thing to do, right? Some of you said, yes, it's a reminder of who we're missing. There's outside pressure to feel joy. Yes. Lots of social events. Some of you mentioned that, right? We feel like, wow, we need to be doing all this stuff. And then we feel bad about ourselves if we're not going to them. There's pressure to have a great holiday. Social media perfection. It feels like everyone's having a better holiday than you. Might I remind you, everyone is showing you their best moments on Facebook and Instagram. Just want to remind you. Yes, others' expectations of what feelings are right or wrong can be terrible instead of recognizing where each of us may be. And there's no true right or wrong. Absolutely. Absolutely. Here's a question for you. Are there some traditions and rituals that you want to opt out of this year? Like, is there something that this year you're just like, you know what? Like, I'm feeling heavy hearted. It's just a no. Hell to the yes. Give me something specific. Is there something like, is there something that you're like, yeah, I'm just not doing that? Maybe it's I'm not going to the work Christmas party this year. Maybe it's I'm not gonna, we always used to bake 12 different kinds of cookies. I'm not doing that this year. Maybe I'll do two. Maybe I won't do any. The gifts. Oh, yes, of course. Not decorating outside. There you go. Maybe I can tell you, me personally, like I've toned down the decorating inside. Um, I just, didn't want to bring all the stuff out this year. I just felt like, it's just too much because, then I need to put it all back and just want to give myself permission, not decorating at all, the tree. Yeah. Um, Reduce decorating. Yeah. Not buying as many presents, focusing more on quality time. That's beautiful. Okay, now maybe you do love some aspects of the holidays. Maybe you do love some of the traditions and the rituals. So choose what you will do. So, is there some traditions or rituals that you will choose to do this year? Let me know what those might be. Driving hours to relatives' house. Yeah, there's something. We're going somewhere we never celebrated with mom. Didn't want to try and celebrate with her absent. Oh, yeah. Yeah, 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 yeah. Um, He hasn't talked to me since. Okay, so some things you do want to continue to do is a tree, football, local ladies group, Christmas dinner, watching holiday shows, traveling to Michigan. Mm, yeah, right. So here's the beautiful thing. The beautiful thing is you get to choose what to opt out of and what to not opt out of. Now I know all of a sudden we start to get a little nervous about that because what are other people going to think? We're still going to make grandma's recipe for Christmas food. That's awesome. I love that. I love that. Bought presents early to avoid crowds and stress. Yes. I did the same thing. Almost. Pretty almost. I mean, I really planned far in advance this year for that reason. So I want to suggest for your consideration that we let go of people pleasing. You're allowed to have the holiday you want. Let me say it for those of you in the back. You're allowed to have the holiday you want. Others may not like the choices that you make. And you know what? It's okay. And when we are used to people pleasing just means we do things because we want to accommodate everyone else. We want to make everyone else happy. When we stop doing that, people are rarely pleased with that. It's true, but it's okay. They're going to survive. They're going to survive. Well-meaning people are going to have a lot of opinions of how you should go through the holidays. And here's my advice. Let other people manage their own emotions. It's not your job to manage their emotions. Other people's opinions are none of your business. It's true. So let's talk about perhaps some ways to navigate the holidays. First of all, here's some options for you, right? Set aside some time to grieve on the holiday. Grief doesn't need a lot of time, but it does need some dedicated time. Decide what you need, what the ideal day would look like for you. If you're going somewhere, have a strategy to leave. That might mean you go in, you're like, hey, I'm just stopping by. I just wanted to drop by, wish everybody happy holidays, but I can't stay long. And hey, then if you end up having a great time, stay longer. Decide what is meaningful to you this time of year. What's important to you? And I think it's also important to be flexible and to go with some change because you know what? The holidays are different. You're doing a Zoom call. Oh, yes, doing a Zoom call with your women vet support group. Oh, how cool. And recognize that each year will be different. And can you be okay with that? And I also want to encourage you to find support, something like this, right? My idea about this was to some degree, I was like, whoo, boy, could I use to be with some other grievers? So I was like, okay, well, what a better way to do that than perhaps me to also be of service, to be with other grievers, be of service, but also feel supported. Like, wow, you know what? As much as we feel alone, we are not alone. You don't have to look very far for grieving people. Matter of fact, you can look left, you can look right, and you will find a grieving person. Yeah. But again, we don't talk about it. So it feels very alone. Can you include the loss in the holiday? What might that even look like? Maybe you post something online. Maybe you go to the cemetery. Maybe you light a candle in someone's honor. And again, all of this stuff, figure out, again, I'm talking very broadly to animal loss and human loss, people loss. Sometimes I call animals people though, so that's why I'm saying human. All of this applies. Put their picture on the table. Take a walk in their honor. Listen to music that reminds you of them. Look at pictures of them. If any of this feels good. And if it doesn't, that's fine too. But give grief its time. Like I said, grief doesn't need a lot of time, but it needs some dedicated time. And for those of you that have kids that have experienced loss, check in on the kids because kids can be the forgotten grievers. We sometimes, as adults, get caught up with our own stuff when we forget about the kids. We forget about that they may be feeling sad too. And we don't sometimes remember to just spend a few moments talking to them. Wow, how are you feeling? Grandma's not here this year, or, you know, Virgil's not here this year, or Frisky isn't here this year. Like, let's not forget about the kids. Kids are so pure when it comes to grief, right? And they don't like to be lied to. They want to be told the truth, and they deserve the truth when the truth can be told to them. There may be situations where the truth is better held from them, but in most situations, it's the truth is what's important to them. Let's be honest, I know that for many of us, I'm curious, show of hands. Show of hands in the chat, because I usually can't see it, with the hand emoji. in the chat. How many of you were shielded from grief as kids? How many of you weren't allowed to go to funerals? Um, how many of you felt like you were shielded from grief as a kid? I got some hands coming up. Yeah, definitely. Yeah. Yeah, which that was sort of appropriate then. Like we were trying to, and I remember even talking to my mom about this, and my brother was very upset that he wasn't able to go to my grandfather's funeral. He wanted to go, and my mom wouldn't let him. And my mom's thought process about that was, you know what, you'll have your whole life to be exposed to death and to go to funerals. And she thought she was doing him a favor by preventing it a little bit longer. But he still um, he still feels deep regret about that. Like it's, you know, it's something that he really wished was not the way it was. Oh, I'm seeing so many of you. I'm seeing so many of you that have lost so closely to when we're doing this. And not me. I was 14 when my first brother died. Then my grandmother 5 months later. Whew. Oh, mm, mm. So now those of you, some of you came here talking about or experiencing anticipatory grief. And, you know, a couple things to say to those of you that are experiencing anticipatory grief. First of all, grief isn't just an all-encompassing thing. It actually plays nice in the sandbox with a lot of other things, to be honest. Grief can coexist beautifully with gratitude, right? It's like, can we feel grief for what we are losing in our person, in our animal that maybe has an illness or disease, and we know that death is coming? Can we feel that grief? And can we also be grateful that they are still here in whatever capacity? Can we be grateful for the times that we've had? Can you work to manage your stress and give yourself credit for the things that you've done versus feeling guilty? Can you take a break when you need it? Can you wrap your mind around the reality of how there will be changes in your loved one's health status? And do you have a realistic image of what that might be, even when it's painful? And can you also know that you're not alone? I think one of the most powerful mantras, if you will, as it relates to anticipatory grief is, you know, comes out of the 12-step programs, which is just, you know, one day at a time. I mean, that's all we have anyways. I don't know, but we all think we have more. That's why we have our future plans and all that stuff. I get it. I like to have future plans too. But the truth of the matter is all we do have is one day at a time. And, you know, there's also, I'm sure many of you are familiar with the serenity prayer. The serenity prayer, God grant me the serenity to accept the things I cannot change, the courage to change the things I can, and the wisdom to know the difference. There's some freedom in that of knowing what I can change, knowing what I can't change. All of my friends were elderly folks at my church, so it was a funeral like every other month as a kid, which didn't strike me as odd at the time. Yeah, interesting. So you were kind of around that a lot. Yeah. So, you know, for sure, there is no right way to grieve. And there is no right or wrong way to do grief. And I know that sometimes many of us think that we haven't processed losses. And I don't know. I mean, I think that we all grieve the way we're able to grieve when we experience loss. In other words, so many of you lost people very significant in your life or animals significant in your life when you were young. Your capacity to grieve when you're, you know, in your single digits and your double digit year teenage years is limited. Your capacity is limited. I have a feeling you grieved the best you could. And the beautiful thing about all of this is that guess what? It's a continual journey of grief. And as we are able to open up, lean more into grief, be willing to feel our feelings, then that grief process just still keeps going. But I think sometimes people think that they haven't grieved. I think you all have grieved, right? And I don't think that there's a wrong way to do it. I think there's just the way that we've done it. Now, one of the things that I also think is important to understand is grief is extremely dysregulating to our nervous system. Our nervous system, generally speaking, vacillates in between these three states. We again are, and the green state in the middle is our resilient state. This is the state when we are thriving, when we are doing our best in our life. Things may be happening in our life, challenges and difficulties, but we're able to deal with it all okay. We're engaged with it. We can, again, we're experiencing our emotions. We're able to navigate through the challenges of life in a resilient way, in a resilient manner. But our nervous system, again, also fluctuates. It goes, you've all heard the term fight or flight, right? That's a stress response. That's what we call hyperarousal. That happens with grief. Sometimes we get overreactive. We're emotionally distressed. We can't think straight. We are panicking. We are anxious about a loss. Or we go down into what's called hypoarousal, where we become numb. We are immobilized. We can't get out of bed. We are stuck, right? And what we want to be able to do is move through all of these states fairly easily and spend more time in the middle resilient state. And that can be hard to do without some understanding of our nervous system and what it looks like to get stuck into these different states. So what I want to be able to offer you is that healing from loss requires one thing. Well, it requires a lot of things, but from a nervous system standpoint, it requires safety. What is safety? Safety is when you feel centered and grounded and balanced within yourself. So I would love to invite you to take a moment and place your hand over your heart and close your eyes if you can. And if you're in a place where you can say it out loud and say, I am safe. I am safe right now. Because the truth is, if you are on this webinar, you are safe, or you wouldn't be on this Zoom. You are empirically safe right now. And this is important for your nervous system to understand, because grief makes us feel threatened. And that's why we kind of vacillate into that hyperarousal state or that hypoarousal state. We get dysregulated. We go into fight or flight, or we go into freeze. And the goal is to spend less time getting stuck in either of those and more time in the resilient state, which again, we are still grieving, but yet we are able to be with ourselves because we have invited safety in. So sometimes actually, even like today, as I was thinking about this webinar, I was like, oh, wow, like never really taught on grief before. And I was like, I was getting dysregulated. And what did I kept doing? I kept doing is putting my hand over my heart and going, I'm safe. I am safe. I am safe. So I want to offer you that, as especially during the holidays when you're starting to feel like it's too much, you're getting overwhelmed. Again, bring yourself back to safety. And if right now, if safety feels a little, you're like, I'm not really sure what safety is. Can you think back to a time in your life where you felt very safe in a setting? There was a setting. Maybe it was when you were at camp as a kid. Maybe it was in your childhood bedroom. That's what it was for me. That is a place where I felt very safe. And when I close my eyes and think about how I felt in that room with my canopy bed and all of my stuffed animals, I felt very safe in that room. That may not be all of your experiences. Is there another place that you felt safe? When you sat by the lake, when you were on the beach, when you were hiking in the woods, when you were with your dog, when you were with your best friend? Like, is there a place, is there something you can come to in your life where you're like, wow, that's a time when I felt really safe, centered and grounded and balanced? And if nothing comes to mind, then you can also just imagine a time, right? Like a setting right now of like, wow, I can just see myself, um, on the beach in Hawaii and hearing the waves and just like, and smelling the ocean breeze or smelling the salt in the air and hearing the seagulls. Wow, like that's a time I can feel safe. Like, can you lock that in? That sense of safety. That's what we want to keep coming back to. That's essentially a safety cue. And again, your healing requires safety. You cannot heal if you do not feel a sense of safety, and you have to keep bringing yourself back to it, bringing yourself back to it. And it also very well pairs with self-compassion. Grief requires that we treat ourselves with kindness and love and understanding, because you are struggling, you are suffering to some degree in certain moments. And it requires you to be kind to yourself. It requires you to not allow yourself to go down the road of creating guilt about the conditions around your beloved's death. We all like to do that. We all believe we should have done something different. And guilt is sort of this escape route, right? We spend a lot of time in guilt because it's an escape route to feeling the real pain and sorrow that comes with grief. So we'd rather spend time in guilt rather than the helplessness of our loss. It makes sense, but it doesn't serve us. So one of the things that, there are many different grief models. Grief models are, psychologists have created grief models since the beginning of psychology. And this is one of my favorite. This is Strobe and Shoot. And what it's showing us is that there's this oscillation between our loss-oriented activities, if you will, where we're doing our grief work, we're in the grief, we are working on ourselves, we're feeling the feels, and then we're in our restoration activities when we're trying to, live. We're trying to do some new things. We're trying to distract ourselves sometimes from grief. We're maybe even trying to avoid our grief because grief isn't something we can be in 24/7, 365. We want to titrate it, little at a time, little at a time, little at a time, which means sometimes we have to go and pay the mortgage. Sometimes, thankfully, we have pets. Thankfully, we have to go and feed the cat or change the litter box, right? And I know sometimes our pets are such a gift to us in grief. They can also be the source of our grief, but they can also be gifts to us when we're grieving because they get us out of bed. They get us off the couch. They get us out of our grief for a moment to have to go and do the daily things about continuing with life. So there's this oscillation back and forth, right? We're in the grief and then we're doing our restoration activities, our living. Like we're in the grief and we're living, grief, living. I'm on the floor sobbing and then I have to go and get an oil change. Hopefully not at the same time, because that would be awkward. The other grief model we probably all are familiar with are the 5 stages of grief, which are, again, this is Elizabeth Kubler-Ross's 5 stages of grief. They're very misunderstood. The 5 stages of grief were, first of all, never meant to be linear and were never meant to mean that everyone goes through all stages. They don't. But they were, again, a real good understanding, especially early on, of the different aspects of grief. And David Kessler, my grief teacher, introduced the 6th stage of grief, and that is meaning. And meaning ultimately comes from finding a way to sustain love for those that you have lost while moving forward in your life. And it doesn't mean that we stop longing for them or yearning for them. Doesn't mean we stop missing them. It means that you have a new appreciation of how precious life is. And meaning comes with a lot of challenges. Not going to doubt that. But here's the thing. We are all having to make choices all of the time. We are making choices about whether to move towards healing or to stay stuck in our grief. And there's not a right or wrong there. I felt like I was stuck in grief for a while. I couldn't get out of my own way. But grief requires movement. The future requires that we move from the past, saying goodbye to the life that we had and being willing to consider what the future may hold. That's movement. And it may not be easy. So a little bit about meaning. Meaning is relative, and it's also really personal. And it takes time to find or create meaning. Now, don't misunderstand what I'm talking about by finding meaning. Finding meaning doesn't mean that we understand why someone died. That is not what meaning is about. Creating meaning is figuring out how to integrate the loss and still live our life. Meaning doesn't negate the loss. No one can find meaning but you. And I will tell you that meaningful connections sometimes replace the painful memories. So sometimes we can create meaning that remembers the loss and honors the life. And, tonight I spent, I had about 7 minutes before I was clicking go on the webinar. And in my office here, I have for lack of a better word, I have a altar, if you will, to my mom, all kinds of pictures and little knickknacks on it, things that remind me of her. And I had about 7 minutes, and I said, I want to get into the space of this webinar or this session here. And I played, I have a grief playlist, and I played one of my songs, and I just got down there and really like looked at all the pictures and not only remembered the loss, but honored my mom's life. So grief doesn't change, but what ends up happening is our capacity to hold it increases. You may have all seen this before, the grief ball thing on the side here, right? The grief doesn't get any smaller, but our container gets bigger, if you will. Our container gets bigger, which I think is really a beautiful thing. So, I have a real special treat for you coming up next. I have a favorite poet that I'll tell you about here in a second, but I reached out to him and asked him. He wrote a poem that I saw recently online. He wrote a poem that I thought spoke so much to grief and the holidays. And I reached out to him and asked him if he would make a video, because I was just going to read the poem to y'all, but I knew I would never do it justice that he would do it. So I just have to change the setting here real quick. And then I'm going to share his reading of this poem. Okay. Here we go. Hopefully get this to go again. All right. Sit back. Here we go. Okay, so I want to introduce you to, some of you may know John Rodell. He has been a gift to me in my grief. His words penetrate right to my heart, and I am so grateful that he made this video for us. So I hope you will enjoy, and I hope this means as much to you as it means to me, because he made it for us.
To grieve amid the bells of December is one of life's most bittersweet things. It's hard to hide our fake smiles and heartbreak under the glow of Christmas light strings. Ring, ring, ring. We're asked out to parties, but we opt to stay home with our ghosts of Christmas past, who offer to put bright red bows on each of our blue tears once they begin to pour fast. Ring, ring, ring. Everyone else seems so jolly in their holiday suits as they surf this great Yuletide wave, but we will be too busy to join them as we search for the wonder star from inside of our dark caves. They ring, ring, ring. It's fine not to be festive this year when our hearts are broken in two, because grief isn't something we just get over. It's a passage that we must just go through. Ring, and they ring, ring. As the bells of December clamor around us, let's pretend they're not lumps of coal. Perhaps it's just our departed beloveds who learned to play music with their souls. Ring, ring, ring. Every bell ring can be a Christmas letter that our missing beloveds will write. And each letter ends the same way. Someday, our two broken halves will reunite. Ring, ring, ring. So let the bells ring and clang and play and be a holiday psalm. sung by our loved ones who had to slip away, but who aren't actually gone. Ring, ring, ring.
Hmm. Mm, 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 mm. Okay. I hope you enjoyed that as much as I did. Oop. So let me tell you a little bit about John. Where the heck am I? Can't even see myself here. Know where my little thing went. Um, John Rodell writes amazing poetry, and this book, if you're looking for poems that relate to grief, I highly recommend this one called Upon Departure. Um, it is amazing. It's available on Amazon, and all of his poems are amazing, but this one is my absolute favorite. So I want to just end with this little ditty. Grief is like glitter. You can throw a handful of glitter into the air, but when you try to clean it up, you'll never get it all. Even long after the event, you will still find glitter tucked into corners. It will always be there somewhere. So, friends, I want you to look around for glitter that you might see here in the upcoming days. And perhaps you consider that those little specks of glitter are a little reminder of those that you love. And may I say that what a joy it is to love someone so much that you are heartbroken when they leave. I thank you all for being with me tonight. I am deeply grateful for all of you just being here and sharing um, so so selflessly and being so willing to be vulnerable and also just willing to gather with others in a circle of grief and being willing to talk about it and be willing to really think about your own experiences. It's been a delight to be with you, and I hope that this puts just a little twinkle in your holiday, but have the holiday that's right for you. I hope you feel as though tonight you've been given some permission to have the holiday that you want, and let everyone else think what they want, but this is about you and you doing what feels right. Let go of the expectations, let go of the Hallmark movie channel, and you do you, sweet friends. So, oh, thank you for all of the nice messages. Oh, I see so many of them. Oh my gosh, look at all of you in here. Jeepers creepers. Yeah, I know so many of you. Yeah, 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 yeah. Oh, I'm so glad. I'm so glad. Take what you want, leave the rest. Oh, look at everybody. Ah, I know everybody in the chat. Good, good, good. Thank you all. Wishing you all, I don't even, I'm wishing you just a holiday that feels right, whatever that means, or not a holiday. You do you, like I said. Thank you so much. See you all in 2024, and maybe we'll do something like this again. I hope this has been meaningful. Okay. Love you all. Love you all. Good night, everybody. Goodbye, everyone. Thanks for being here with me. I appreciate you all. Thank you. Be well, everyone. Take care.